Word. Well, welcome everyone to the round two Ulster County Housing Action Fund webinar. The intent here tonight is to provide a little more detail about the application process as well as the Housing Action Funds. This is our second year doing it, and we're off to a great start with year one. I'm just going to drop a link to our website where you can find out a lot more information about the grant. I am joined by Dennis Doyle, our planning director for Ulster County. If you want to introduce yourself, Dennis.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. We're looking forward to a successful launch of round two, and we hope to see some great housing projects coming in with respect to this funding round. We want to thank the county executive and the county legislature for allowing us to issue this NOFA and for setting up a housing action fund.
And Dennis, could you help out admitting people?
I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciated. So I just dropped a link to the Housing Action Fund website on our Participate Ulster site. Hopefully everyone has gotten to take a look at this. It has the application documents and related materials. It has it has the NOFA document, which is kind of the guiding document for this round two funding, as well as a lot more information. I also just wanted to note before I walk through this presentation that this fund specifically focuses on funding for housing organizations and for developers of affordable housing that are looking to propose or are already in the process of developing new affordable housing in Ulster County. This grant is not for individual homeowners to do upgrades to their home. We have a number of other programs that we can share information about if you are interested, but this one really is focused on supporting new development of affordable and workforce housing in Ulster County. I have disabled the chat, but you can send questions or comments to myself and Dennis. The intent here is to walk through the presentation and hopefully it doesn't take too long. And feel free to put your questions in the chat as I'm walking through the presentation. And then at the end, Dennis and I will try to answer all of your questions. And if we can't answer them right away, we'll follow up. We'll get your information and follow up with an email. I'm just going to give myself a little timer. Okay. So round two of the Housing Action Fund, as Dennis mentioned, this was created by Ulster County Executive Jen Metzger and the Ulster County Legislature in 2023. We had our first round of funding last year, and I can talk a little bit about that, but really the focus here is the nitty-gritty details of the application process for round two and what types of projects are available and what are not allowed. So the Housing Action Fund is essentially a housing trust fund set up by the county, seeded with $15 million from excess fund balance from the county in 2023. The intent is to create more housing that focuses on the county's most vulnerable populations, including those who are unhoused, populations with special needs, and then households making up to 80% of Ulster County area median income. The Housing Action Fund is administered by the Planning Department and is overseen by our Housing Policy and Oversight Committee. That's a committee of housing experts who are volunteering their time to help us with reviewing applications and moving the projects along from year to year. So without going into too much detail, this is essentially the process. There's an allocation for round two. It's $3 million for projects for 2025. We are in kind of the second step here, NOFA application process, where the NOFA is now open. The applications are now open, closing May 16th. Once applications close, that committee that I just mentioned will review all of the proposals, score them, meet to discuss which projects they think should move forward, and then make recommendations to the county executive for which projects should be funded and the amount they should be funded for. That then goes with the county executive and the legislature for approval of those funds. And then a project would enter into a contract with the county for the release of those funds. And then the project is hopefully built, and then there's long-term monitoring in the future. These are the projects that we awarded for round one, approximately 120 additional affordable housing units across 5 projects. In the county, we had a wide range of the type of projects. We have the Quality Inn project, which is a supportive housing project. We've got some affordable home ownership projects, a senior affordable rental project in New Paltz. We've got a home ownership project in town of Saugerties, and then a kind of redevelopment upgrade of a manufactured home park in the town of Hurley. So pretty, as you can see, a pretty wide range of the types of projects that can get funded under the Housing Action Fund, and I'll go into a lot more details, but just wanted to highlight here that you know, the fund is successful. We're hoping to get more projects this year and continue this on an annual basis for a long time to come. So now I'm going to jump into the details of the application process. So applications opened on March 7th. Applications close on May 16th at 3 p.m. So it's about a 3-month application window, which was hopefully enough time for everyone to put all the pieces together to submit their application. Paper applications, if you're submitting, all the information is on the Participate Ulster website and the NOFA document on how to submit. If you're submitting a paper application, it must be postmarked May 16th and sent to the Ulster County Planning Department. Online applications, there's the submittal portal, must also be submitted by 3 p.m. on May 16th. And then, as I mentioned, the Housing Action Fund page on the Participate Ulster website has a lot more details on this whole process. In terms of eligible applicants, 501c3 nonprofit organizations incorporated in New York State are eligible. Public housing authorities that serve Ulster County are eligible. Private housing developers are eligible. Municipalities can apply, and any team consisting of these different entities can also apply together for a project. So in terms of eligible projects for round 2, we've got kind of 2 categories here. The first is direct housing development. So that is emergency and supportive housing projects. And I just want to highlight here for everyone that this is a priority for the county executive and for the county legislature. So we have increased the maximum award amount to $1 million for emergency and supportive housing projects. We really love to see some of those projects come in, and that does not necessarily mean building new emergency housing, but taking a property that already exists and converting it into supportive or emergency housing. We also have the affordable rental projects category, affordable for sale or affordable home ownership projects, the preservation of affordable housing for housing cooperatives and community land trusts. So that's taking existing housing and converting it into long-term affordable housing. And then we have funding for housing related infrastructure. So that's infrastructure that's needed, both public and private infrastructure that is needed to help a affordable housing project move forward. So that's where a municipality might come in and apply for funding for a project that's being developed. In terms of the criteria, I'll go into a little bit more detail. There's a lot of information in the NOFA document, but generally, the things that are mandatory is funding for units must be above and beyond the mandatory municipal affordability requirements. So, for instance, the city of Kingston, over a certain size of projects, 10% of those units have to be affordable. If you want to apply for funding through this funding opportunity, you would have to go above and beyond that 10%. You can't apply for those units that are required by law. This has to be, you have to go above and beyond. So that's the first requirement. The second requirement is focusing on sustainability. There's kind of two tiers. Projects that are 10 or less units has one sustainability guideline, and then 11 or more, another sustainability guideline. These are both state guidelines that will probably be used for other funding sources for your project, and so we're aligning with the state on that. Links and a lot more information in the NOFA. We're prioritizing municipalities that are part of our Housing Smart Communities initiative. If you don't know if your project is in that, look at our website, housingsmartcommunitiesinitiative.org or .com. But if you search that on the internet, you can find that. And then not eligible are pre-development costs. So we need to have a clear understanding that the project is actually going to happen. And so we want to avoid projects that we fund for pre-development but never materialize. And then projects, we can't fund projects that have already been funded through another county funding stream. So those are the two non-eligible uses there. In terms of affordability, we've got a minimum of 50 years for all projects, and we encourage projects that are being placed into a community land trust or another tool for long-term affordability, like a limited equity cooperative or working and partnering with a housing organization. I'll just note here that 50 years is a long period. It's kind of on the higher end of the maximum of what would be required. If your project has a 30-year affordability period, the way we would structure that is looking at that 30-year affordability period, and at the end of that, a renegotiation of what that next 20 years would look like. But that is our requirement for 50 years for all projects. And also, also on the Ulster County Housing Action Fund website is the affordability guidelines. So this is what the requirements would be over the long term to ensure that the affordability of the project is continuing. It's a relatively painless process. It's an annual reporting process, so it would just be an annual report to the county on the affordability requirements and making sure that everything is up to date there. So now I'm going to jump into a little bit more detail about each of the funding categories and just the max amounts that are allowed under each project. So the first is projects at the 60% area median income level with a maximum of $70,000 per unit, minimum of 4 units per project, and then a maximum of $700,000. Similarly, the 61 to 80% AMI range, there's a maximum of $40,000 per awarded unit and a minimum of 4 units per project, and then a maximum total project amount of $400,000. If you're curious about AMI, the AMI numbers for 2024 are included in the NOFA document, and I will probably put it directly on the landing page for the Housing Action Fund so everyone can just see that easily. We are funding the rehabilitation of existing housing units, but those units need to be offline, meaning it needs to be a foreclosed property or code violations, some sort of unit that is not online right now, but with rehabilitation could be put back online and rented or sold. So we are funding rehab, but it's not for existing occupied housing. It's for foreclosed or condemned properties or something similar to that. For home ownership or for sale projects, our cap is the 80% AMI or below cap. There's a maximum of $70,000 per unit, a minimum project size of 4 units, and then a maximum total project amount of $700,000. The way this is structured is essentially the units are sold, and then there's a formula to ensure that as the units are paid off and equity is built for the homeowner, when they go to sell that unit, it is sold to someone at the same income level or lower, and that's how we maintain affordability. It's very similar to what a community land trust does, but there are other mechanisms as well. But for home ownership projects, that's generally the mechanism that we'll be looking to make sure that the units are affordable over the long term. For emergency and supportive housing projects, there's a minimum of 8 units. Units here there's more information in the NOFA document, but because it's emergency housing, units translates a little bit differently. That could be beds. We're open to approaches on how you want to look at emergency housing. But the maximum amount for that is $1 million. And it needs to serve households at or below the 50% area median income level. For supportive housing projects, in case anyone doesn't know, supportive housing is generally long-term permanent housing, but for populations that need extra support. So frail elderly, people living with disabilities, those types of things. For that type of project, there's a maximum of $60,000 per unit, a minimum of 8 units per project, and then a maximum funding amount of $1 million per project. And then this also needs to serve the 50% AMI or below category. For housing related infrastructure, minimum project size of 8 units for the infrastructure related to the project. This is actually wrong, excuse me. It's now $400,000 as a maximum for this project. And this funding category can be applied to for sale units or rental projects, but is really intended for kind of ancillary infrastructure. So solar, geothermal, anything energy related, public sidewalk improvements, water and sewer related infrastructure and tie-ins, utility installation costs. Yeah. So I apologize, I guess, but the application is somewhat lengthy, and we are asking for a lot of information, but this is the type of information that we need to verify that the project is real, that there is funding sources available to complete the project, and that the project will come to completion at some point in the next couple of years. So we're looking for a project summary and information, how much you're actually requesting in terms of the total amount and per unit amount. We need information on the applicant and your previous experience, whether that's you as a developer or the team that you're putting together to execute the project, and then some references as well from some of your past projects. Any local support letters that you can provide from the local municipality and elected officials, from community organizations, really helps in the competitive review process for our awards. We need to know what the affordability level is and how many units at what affordability level there is. There's an Excel document where you can plug in all of that information and then submit that with your application. We also need to know that you are generally ready to go or moving in the direction of being ready to pull construction permits and start building the project. So that means evidence of site control, or in some cases, a very clear agreement between the property owner and the developer that the land will be transferred at X date during a certain phase of the development process. Financial feasibility. So in that Excel spreadsheet that I mentioned, we have a tab for your capital stack. So all of your funding sources that are going to fill in the various pieces of your project and make the project pencil out for whatever cost estimates you have for that project. It's okay if you do not have all your project funding sources secured already, but what we do want to get a sense of is which ones have been secured, which ones are you planning to apply for. You can include this in that capital stack, the Housing Action Fund in that capital stack. But we really want to make sure that you're thinking about all the funding sources you need to make sure that you don't have a gap for your project. We've got the sustainability requirements that I mentioned, kind of 2 tiers, excuse me, for that. And then there's a brief section on how you are going to meet those requirements. In most cases for projects, the easiest path here is hiring a third-party verification process for your sustainability requirements. It will add a little bit to your project, but between your architect and your third-party verification process, the sustainability requirements should be pretty easy. These are the same sustainability requirements that all HCR state housing funding sources are required to do. So it's not a huge lift, especially if you've got a bigger project. Site location, where's the site relative to services, relative to public transit, relative to other things? We want to be location efficient with these projects. And so we just need to know where it is. That doesn't mean we're not going to fund it, but we'd like to know where it is relative to other services and things. And then we're asking for application organizational documents. So that is tax filings or members of your board, all the pieces of the puzzle that show us that you're a real organization, that you've done development projects of some sort in the past. Individuals are not eligible to apply here, so it has to be either through an LLC or a for-profit or nonprofit organization. These are the general scoring criteria of what we're looking at. And when I say we, I mean the Housing Policy and Oversight Committee. There are 5 members. So we are looking at readiness, how ready you are. Is this the year that you're ready to apply for funding, or maybe you need another year in the future, or there's some unknowns there? Affordability and cost effectiveness. So we want to make sure that, your per unit amounts aren't excessive, and that you're using the money effectively, and that you're targeting the right affordability levels for Ulster County. Are you considering social equity and community engagement in that process? Are you working with the community and the town and elected officials to really make sure that the project is cohesive, fits within the community, that you're working with the community on feedback as much as possible? Site selection. Sometimes this is not hard to choose. Sites come up where they come up, but we do want to see that you're being considerate of where that site is relative to transportation, relative to other services. And then innovation and demonstration of best practices. So, this is funding, this is a grant tied to affordability, but we really want to make sure that we're pushing the needle forward in terms of what affordable housing looks like in Ulster County, especially if we can bring costs down per unit. We're always excited to see new ways to do that. So how am I doing on time? Okay. So there's a lot more information in the NOFA document about this, but generally, if you are awarded, you will have to go through state environmental quality review if that is required for the project. So we'd like to see documentation that process has been completed or close to completion before we enter into a contract. Then the awardee will request a Housing Action Fund grant agreement within 12 months of the award notification. The contract is signed, negotiations are done, and the contract is signed with the county for release of funds. Awardee successfully receives their local construction and building permits to begin project construction and submits to the Ulster County Planning Department. So this is an important piece of this, is that we cannot release funds until we see a building or construction permit from that local municipality to guarantee that your project is started and that you're going to be drawing funds for construction costs. The awardees can request draw down payment on a cost incurred basis no later than 18 months after award notification. Ulster County issues the funds to the grantee. You can draw them down all at once if you can prove the costs incurred there, and we hold a 10% retainer of the fund until the C of O, certificate of occupancy for the project, and then we'll release the last 10%. If you are awarded, the county will request brief progress reports or just meetings from the awardees on a 3-month basis. So on a quarterly basis while the project is being constructed and completed. The awardee must complete the project within 24 months from the date funds are dispersed, not when the contract is signed, but when you start drawing down funds, you've got 24 months to complete the project. There is an option to request an extension of the funding if it's needed, but you'll need to provide an explanation of why you need an extension and what's going on there. Feel free to throw your questions in the chat if you have them. I might just unmute folks and you can raise your hand as well. It's a smaller crowd. Again, this is the process. I think in the NOFA this year, we expect to have award announcements in August. So it'll close in May, and then the county and the committee have a couple months to review the project and hammer out the details and then make those recommendations to the county executive. Here's my information. I will be helping to answer day-to-day questions from any applicants that you might have. I'll drop my email in the chat here as well. You can request a pre-application meeting. I would just request that you read thoroughly through the NOFA document and all the information on the Housing Action Fund website before you set up that meeting, just so we can talk through details that wouldn't otherwise be in the NOFA document. Generally, one meeting per applicant is allowed. We can exchange emails, but I want to make time for everyone in that process. Questions on the applications are due on May 1st. I will post the questions and answers on the Participate Ulster website as they come in, but that's kind of the final date for all questions. Again, paper applications, if you're sending them in, or you can drop them off in the planning department. Must be postmarked May 16th, 2025, or hand delivered to the Ulster County Planning Department by 3 p.m. And then online applications must be submitted by 3 p.m. on the 16th as well. And
Hi,
we will,
can you give us the location where you're going to submit online applications?
yeah, there is a button on the Housing Action Fund website titled, there's a section, but there's a link here that says Housing Action Fund Submission Uploads. And it's just a Google form where you can submit the full package of up to 100 megabytes of information for your project. As applications come in, either on the 16th or before, I'll give you confirmation receipt that we've received your applications as well. I think that is it. With a good amount of time to spare, and I see a couple questions. I'll try to answer these questions, but maybe if you raise your hands, if you have other questions, I can answer those as well. Can we apply for both infrastructure money and housing rehab funds? So first question, can we apply for both infrastructure money and housing rehab funds? So the way this works is essentially the project category cap is still in place, but you can split some of those funds for infrastructure and for units, so long as you're under the maximum amount for that type of project. So if it was an emergency housing project, you could get up to $1 million, and then 400,000 of that could be spent on infrastructure, hypothetically. Also, is there a total of 2 million for housing other than supportive and emergency housing? 2 million for, so I think I understand this question, but I might ask you, Jan, to come off if I don't answer this correctly. So there's $3 million available. There's no allocation for any one type of project now. It's the projects that come in, we're gonna fund. The maximum for emergency housing projects is $1 million, but we may not get any of those projects, so they may all go to rental projects and things like that. Does that answer your question, Jan? Okay. Can you give us some examples of innovation and demo of best practices from the first round? From the first round, well, I think one innovation is taking what we would call like adaptive reuse. So taking traditionally non-residential spaces like the Quality Inn project, which was an old motel, and turning that into housing. I think that's adaptive reuse is a type of innovation. Um, the Habitat for Humanity project in Saugerties is using modular construction. Modular is, for new types of projects can be more cost effective, can have a quicker construction timeline. We're seeing it a lot in throughout the state, really, in terms of building new housing. And so modular construction or prefab construction or panelized construction, anything like that is considered innovative in our eyes. Dennis, do you have any other thoughts on
No,
innovation from
I,
the
I
first
think
round?
that I think that panelized construction is one of the things that's out there. The other thing I would say that you can look at specific elements of your project which could be considered innovative. How you integrate, say, for example, community rooms or other types of uses within the project. The example I would give you is the Momentum Fund, which is another source of funding for these projects, requires a commercial use associated with it. So mixed use could be one of the ways that you play into an innovation or a way to think about a best practice. So it's not just affordable housing. The other thing I would say to you is that looking at the housing mix, the mix of incomes, we, the county supported an intergenerational housing project up on Golden Hill that runs essentially from seniors to workforce housing with affordability from 30% to 80% with an average affordability of 60%. So how you mix those in there, and that project also has about 38 units or 40 units of supportive housing that's in there as well. There are ESHI units in that project as well for frail elderly. So those kinds of things are innovation in terms of we're not just building for seniors, not just building for a single income, et cetera. And the last thing I would say in terms of eligibility is we do provide for income averaging. So when you look at this, your unit doesn't have to be at 80%. You could have some units at 30%, some units at 90%. But what end up happening is your income average would be essentially the units in general that you're considering affordable income average at 60% or at 80%. So does that
Another,
help?
yeah, thank you, Dennis. Another point that I forgot to mention here is that these projects do not have to be all affordable units. They can be mixed income outside of that 80% affordable range. So you could have a project of 50% market rate units and 50% affordable units, or 25% affordable units or something like that. So it's just a per unit cap that we have, and the affordability requirements would carry with that unit for the 50 years, but you can have a mixed income project so long as it goes above and beyond the requirements for a number of affordable housing units that are required by a local municipality. Got another question here. If you if you already have permits, can funding be used for reimbursement of general contractors? Unfortunately, well, Dennis, unfortunately, I don't think that would be covered. Um,
So think of it this way, we're trying to find a gap. We're not trying to essentially, if the project was unaffordable, that's what we're trying to fund. Um, we can have that discussion in terms of where you are, in terms of where your funding is. We have funded in the past applicants that essentially had a capital stack that was funded, and because of the change in construction costs, insurance costs, other types of costs, the project became more or less at risk moving forward. So those are the types of projects we would step in and say we can fill that gap, even though there wasn't a gap when you started the project.
yeah, I think it would really, the answer would be it really depends on the project.
Yeah,
Um,
it's case by
yeah,
case.
right, and where you are in that development process. Another question here. Interested. Is the application process listed only for organizations interested in hosting development? Yes, unfortunately, this funding source is for housing organizations, community organizations, and housing developers to develop new housing of many different types. This isn't for first-time home buyers. I have everyone's email from the registration, so I can follow up and provide a couple links for other sources of funding that are more focused on single-family homeowners. So that answers that question.
What I would say with respect to that is two things. One is the county just received, assuming that the funding remains available at the federal level, a housing rehabilitation grant that's going to be administered by RUPCO. That amount of money is about $650,000. There's caps on the amount of money we can spend on each individual house, but there is a housing rehab grant for homeownership in that instance. The county also established a $1.5 million project for affordable rental upgrade program that's also going through administration by RUPCO. That is designed to essentially provide upgrades to affordable apartment units in exchange for continued affordability of rents. That program is ongoing. We're currently funding, I would say we have 15 or 20 of those units currently funded.
Yeah, I think RUPCO would be for the participant who asked this question. Looking at the RUPCO website would be helpful. We work with them a lot on administering our programs. They also have some of their own funding sources for first-time home buyers. So I would check in there at the Home Ownership Center. Does anyone have any other questions about the application process? That means I did a really good job. Just kidding. Okay, going once, going twice. As I mentioned, shoot me an email if you'd like to set up a pre-application meeting. We also linked to the title is additional housing funding sources to consider on the Participate Ulster website. So we've got a lot of other funding sources that you could potentially use for the project as well. If you set up a pre-application meeting with us, we'll direct you to those sources as well and how to apply for them. And generally help support your application and answer any questions you have. But for now, thank you all for taking time out of your evening to join us. And we look forward to having some great submissions for round 2. And have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.